This is for English 201, May 30th. Can we first review our big quiz that we had? Will that quiz give us a model for how the midterm exam on next week, when we meet again next week, or we meet on Tuesday, right? Will be set, yes. First, let's look at the questions. Did we absolutely need to have studied the archetypes? Yes. But were there some people who actually found their own ways of expressing the archetypes without using my exact words, word for word? Is that legitimate too? Of course. Okay. And did some of you also put in characters with which or with whom you associated particular archetypes? We wanted 6 archetypes. Are we looking at the Earth Mother, Laura, or the boy's mother, if you added that? The brown sugar, Mrs. Herrera or Laura. The Caribbean male as abuser. We can think in terms of George in George and the Pink House, or of course Tony, and even Eddowes, yes? Then the Caribbean woman as victim, and who is the classic version of that? Lorna. Is she the clear, undiluted victim? Yes. Not simply because she commits suicide, but because of what drove her to the suicide. Obviously, some form of sexual molestation, yes? Or child abuse by apparently the teacher, yes? And of course, is she also the victim of her mother's negative example and the victim of her mother's rejection and emotional abandonment? Yes or no? Of course. You pointed out, Cleve, that Laura is in a sense, you gave us the example of the mother in For My Mother May I Inherit Half Her Strength. You both told me that mother was the Caribbean woman as victim of her own strength, victim perhaps of the time and place in which she was living, in which she thought she had to be this perfect earth mother figure, even for a man who obviously had no idea what fatherhood was about or what family life was about, yes? Then the penis personified, as some of you put it, or the stud hat. Then the penis personified, Derrimore put the husband in the galling wife, or of course the husband in For My Mother May I Inherit Half Her Strength. Could we also have added from Love Story? That's by Mervyn Morris. We haven't dealt with that yet. Could I show it to you, if you just a minute? Love Story is this interesting little poem, isn't it? It's so ironic. Yes? It's so brief. Yes? Love gave her eyes, the tough man smiled, locked them up tight, etc. But love gave her heart, made her understand what love was about, that it comes from the heart. The tough man fled, flaccid with fright. Now, flaccid is an interesting word because it's often used in regard to sexual impotence in a man. Yes? In other words, when it came to emotional commitment, this man not only lost interest, but he lost any kind of possibility for actually falling in love. Okay. Are there any others that you people put in that I haven't mentioned? No. Now, as I said, some people put in the characters as well who demonstrated these archetypes, yes, but you actually didn't have to. The next question, so that question was worth 6 points. The next question says, list 3 such archetypes or archetypal issues as connected to the roles or behaviors of each of the following characters. seen so far. You must list 3 archetypes for each character listed below. Okay. Did we get lots of interesting answers from this one? Yes or no? Of course. Okay. First, of course, comes to mind, the one that comes to mind is Hat. Hat is the Caribbean male as abuser, the stud, the penis personified, the disappearing father figure. Some people argued that Hat is also the reappearing father figure, that he reappears later on, but by that time, has the boy's life changed, and has the boy himself changed? Yes, of course. Okay. Then, so Hat could be the Caribbean male as abuser, the stud, the penis personified, the disappearing father figure. Then Laura, yes? Are we looking at the earth mother, the mammy, the brown sugar? Could we also call Laura the vampiric mother figure? Yeah? If you look back at your handout, yes, you would see that. Do we see Laura as the vampiric mother figure because she actually what? Destroys her own child? Yeah. Yes or no? Yes. Okay. So that page then was actually worth 12. 633. Some of us put extra grade points there, marginal notes, which you then were able to get an extra point for. Then on the next page, we're looking at page 2 now. Mrs. Herrera. Brown sugar, Caribbean woman as victim. She's the victim of the boyfriend, yes? But the survivor as well, yes? Does she know exactly when to leave Tony and bounce back home to daddy and to the good life? Yes. But is she also representative of the archetype that we call dualism? Is she both the victim and the abuser? She's the victim of Tony, but she's the abuser of her husband and of her marriage vows. Interesting irony, isn't it? Okay. Then there is the boy narrator's mother. She's the earth mother, the Amazon, the female-headed black family, yes? And is she also the survivor? Okay. Then, this wasn't question 2. It wasn't worth much. But this was from the beginning, and we've gone over it recently. Yes. Are we looking at the level of form or structure? Remember, we called it the how. And the level of content or theme, the what. These are each of those would be worth +1. Then the type of narrative voice used by the boy narrator in Miguel Street. First person narrative, the I narrator. And last time when we were doing our review, and remember all of this is now on the blog. Yes, all the last 3 big sessions are on the blog, and the blog is www.grace.rssgct.com. Okay? So please,
for the boy's mother, you can tell me all the archetypes.
1 minute, please. Did this take time to get it on the blog? Yes. Must we use it for revision this weekend? Yes. The boy's mother, aren't we looking at the earth mother, the Amazon, the survivor, the female-headed black family? Yes? Okay. There's no dualism in her. She simply is the Rock of Gibraltar for her son and for many other people, even people like Mrs. Herrera. Yes? Okay. Now, the first person narrative is, of course, the one that uses I. It's potentially biased because it's subjective. one person's point of view, it's potentially biased. But it's very direct, and it hooks us, yes. It's intense, it's engaged and engaging. It really does hook us, yes? Okay, those were plus 1 each. Then 5 major themes of Miguel Street. And don't we have a lot? Aren't we looking at escape, suicide, waste? Yes, waste of human talent, human life, human potential, abuse, loss, dualism, yes? Then, of course, tragedy and disappointment, deceit, yes? Then do we also get the message that my friend here, Derrimore, says, what goes around comes around? And you actually told me in another question that it's easy to see what goes around coming around in Laura's life. In other words, she has actually sown the seed in her own life that comes back to hurt her in her daughter's situation. Okay. Because I think it was you who said, Cleve, that she has chosen not to have a man as a stable father figure in her life. And let's face it, Laura was able to attract men. Mm-hmm. But does she see the final result of that in her daughter's situation? And she doesn't like it. It's as if the daughter's pregnancy holds up the mirror to Laura's own life, and she doesn't like what she sees, does she? Okay. Can you tell me some other themes of Miguel Street? The brown sugar and her lifestyle. Are we also looking at the importance of protection of the young? Remember Hat and his sugarcoating habits. Yeah. In other words, Hat tries to be a father figure and a protector, yes, for the boy. And he often succeeds. Yes? It's what they just do all the time, swim out and out until they can't swim no more. Mm. Yeah? And if we as adult readers believe that, then Hat could sell us the Brooklyn Bridge or the Statue of Liberty. Isn't that the truth? Because the adult in us says, really? Mm-hmm. Okay. But the adult in us also responds to the character of Hat in a positive way because we know his intentions are good where the boy is concerned. Yes? What goes around comes around is a major theme, isn't it? You also told me that that was a theme in regard to Hat. Was it you, dear, who said Hat had led this hustler life all his life? And then when he needed to change, he could not. And that is how he got in trouble with Dolly. Yes. In other words, he thought that he could continue living the same way and still keep a woman in his house. Dolly got up and left him and took the jewelries too. Yes.
Wait, I said the email, did you get it?
I turned it off. Thank you. And just to stick a pin, Roberto has put on, not only on the blog, he has put on the YouTube 2 of the lectures, and I can send you. Well, we'll have to get that afterwards, yes? Mm-hmm. Hold on a second. Not yet. Oh yes, Jada, thank you very much. Okay, so did we get lots? Mm-hmm. And Jada, can I borrow yours, please? Because people who came late got some separate questions of their own. You and my little friend who is absent, Derrimore.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but we're going to go over all. Can you just sit and sit with Cleve for me. Thank you. I think, okay, and I attached for you, Sherry, this question that you didn't get, and I attached it also for Derrimore. Yes? Is what they does always do, swim out and out until they're tired and can't swim no more. Which character said the above words? Obviously the writer is using dialect. Yeah? Can you see it, or you want another one? Can you see it there? It's page 4. Okay, thank you. It's what they does always do. Will you share with Sherry then?
Sure. She got different questions.
Well, she got an empty page of this, so she can just follow the discussion with Jada. So I don't think Jada will mind. Okay? Okay. Is that the value of a smaller class? There's more pressure on you to talk. Yes? Not like it's a class of 20 people where everybody is talking. But is sharing easier in a smaller class? Yes. Which character said the above words? Hat, obviously. +1. In which work, by which writer? V.S. Naipaul was the writer. The work was Miguel Street. Some of you put Miguel Street and the story Hat, +1 each. About what incident involving which female character is he speaking? Hat is speaking of the incident pertaining to Laura's daughter, Lorna, where she committed suicide by drowning herself. Do you have to use the word suicide? Yeah. Or killed herself? Or drowning herself? Yeah. Do you have to make it crystal clear that this was not an accident, regardless of what Hat may want to tailor-make, for the boy? Is Hat good at really tailoring, comforting little explanations to protect the boy? Of course. Whereas do we see Hat doing that? He says, when the little boy says, how does Laura live?
Yeah, I was playing friends.
Huh? Oh, Laura has some friends in the marketplace who does give her things, and sometimes her husband comes by and bring her things. Yes. Something like that is what Hat dreams up, yes? You remember that one? Yeah. Which makes, remember, this interesting hook, double hook, that this boy narrator creates in us. The child in us says, oh yes, that's nice. Laura had lots of friends. But the adult in us says, oh really? Isn't that the truth? Yes or no? Here we are. And you have this one, don't you, please? This is the extra page that they had gotten. Can you share with him for me, please? Okay. All right. So then, we have to make it clear that we as readers, adult readers, the child in us may want to accept it because we accept whatever Hat says, the way the boy does. But the adult in us says, really? Okay. You have to use the word suicide. You have to make it clear that regardless of what Hat is saying, this was not an accident. Okay. To whom was he speaking? He was speaking to the boy narrator, +1. Circle the elements below which are in any way relevant to the above quotation and its immediate context in the work from which it comes. We're looking at irony, yes, +1. And some of you gave me notes in the margin, which we're encouraged to do. And you said, because what Laura did through these repeated pregnancies was actually what was beginning to be seen in her daughter. Yes? Yeah. But Laura didn't like to see a mirror image of herself in her daughter. So ironic. Are we also looking at waste? Waste of human life, human potential, +1. Suicide is bad enough in an older person, but in a young person, is it tremendously tragic? Because they've lost the opportunity to live life.
And Laura would teach her to go to school.
And Laura, the irony and the waste of the effort.
Yeah.
Laura was hoping that she would become a secretary. Laura was manufacturing money to pay for her to go to secretarial school. And what a terrible, tragic irony in how this ends, right? And remember, this was not America that has all sorts of laws for the protection of young people. Yes? Maybe in America, Laura would have been able to take the school teacher to court. Yes. And do we see situations like that in Cayman? Not necessarily with teachers, of course. Yes? Okay. And some of these people are taken to court.
You took too?
Yeah?
Yeah. No, when article, one thing was made.
About what?
About a, not a teacher, like a football, coach.
A coach. Mm-hmm. In other words, but do the FBI studies and studies coming out of America tell us this awful thing, that the most common abusers of the young are people in positions of trust, family, friends, family members, teachers, counselors, coaches, parents, and what else? In parents, substitute parents, stepfathers, uncles, yes. And I read an interesting article some years ago. It was part, I think, of a doctorate research program that the writer was involved in Essence magazine. And it gave us some shocking statistics coming from interviews, of course, with the police and the FBI and such people, about how many young men in America, African-American young men, actually were sexually abused by stepfather figures, but how many African-American young men ended up in prison for murder or felonious wounding because they were protecting their mothers from the violence of the so-called stepfathers and boyfriends. Interesting. Now the FBI statistics also tell us that, one of the ironies is that many, many times when police try to protect a woman from an abusive lover or husband, the police who get in the way are feloniously wounded themselves. That what is called a lover's quarrel often in the Caribbean between a man and a woman, yes, actually is not a lover's quarrel. It's a situation in which the level of violence is equivalent to all felonies. Now, a felony is a serious crime. It's not a misdemeanor. Yes? It's not somebody coming and slapping Brad Pitt on the face on the red carpet for his wife's latest movies preview or premiere. It's more than that. Yes? Felonious wounding means a serious wound. And it will get you a major crime, a major fine, and get you into prison too. Okay, so are we looking at some interesting implications when we look at these forms of abuse? Of course. Then, so we won't waste. Obviously the teenager was a victim of some form of abuse, which of course got swept under the carpet in that era and that time and that society. Exactly. Then are we looking at euphemism?
That's still today too,
Of course.
Plenty of moms still covering it today.
Plenty mothers are still covering things up. And this is really awful. But are there ways, of course, by which the young abused people can actually get past that abuse? Education. Yes.
We'll tell somebody that they can
Tell somebody that they can trust who is not going to cover it up. Also, a counselor. Are school teachers also able to be trained to know the signs? Yeah. Does that happen in some places in America? Yes or no? And parents as well? Yes? Okay. But do the victims themselves often find ways, often through education and counseling? Yes? And finding their own goals and pursuing their own talents? Yes? Is that why it's so important that parents like Laura should actually learn what a parent really is? Yes or no? Yeah. In other words, do we learn, and those of you who are parents, did you have a very strong reaction against Laura? Yes, you did. Because you saw her as an irresponsible parent. Is that why we called her the vampiric mother figure? Mm-hmm. Euphemism, most definitely. You told me that Hat sugarcoats the suicide in order to protect the boy narrator from the horrible truth. Yes. Protection, of course, plus one again. The breeder. Some of you got an extra point for that because you circled it, but you said why. You said Laura is the Earth Mother. She has 8 children, yes, one of whom she helps to destroy. She helps to push to suicide. Is Bowie right when he says, why is Laura so upset? This is what she does do all the time. Hat does not wish to hear this truth. He slaps him. And then, of course, tragedy. Suicide is a tragedy. What are the tones here? The tones are protective, gentle, comforting, melancholy, sad, because Hat as an adult character knows the truth. Yes? Because remember, Hat had said, life is a hell of a thing. You can see trouble coming and you can't do a thing about it. The foreshadowing, the intuition. Yes? Are we looking at a structure called foreshadowing where the future is intuitively suggested? Yes. Then, of course, a knowing, knowledgeable tone. Hat knows the truth. Then, of course, informative. Yes? Gentle. And, of course, caring. Isn't that the truth? Protective. Yes. It's not that Hat is a dummy. Hat knows the truth. Yes? Okay. So that was that page. And then I think Sherry and
I don't have that.
You don't have that one, so please share. Connect. The people who were absent or late got different pages. So we're going through all pages. Yes? Derrimore, this applies to you too. Did I get some lovely answers from you on these? Yes. Be careful what you want. If these are life lessons or themes, yes, connect them to characters or events or other themes seen in the stories. Be careful what you want. Aren't we looking at Mrs. Herrera? She wants another man beside her loving husband, but he abuses her. It's also ironic, of course. Yes? Be careful what you want. Can we also look at Laura in that regard? Laura wants lots of children. Mm-hmm. Yes? But she really didn't want a man as a continuing focus in her life. Some people would say that what? A man is too much work. He's going to take up too much of your time.
Getting away her and the children.
So, and getting between you and your children. Do I know a lady like that? She didn't have 10 children or 8 children, but in her youth and even in the middle years, she attracted men like flies. Yes? Like flies to honey, lots of men. And you would say, well, don't you want to settle down with one man? And she would say, oh no, man, men take up too much of your time. Are we talking about then lack of commitment? Be careful what you want. You may get it. What you want is a commitment-free life. But in the end, does that backfire on both Mrs. Herrera and Laura? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then, of course, what goes around will come back around. George from George and the Pink House, as well as Mrs. Herrera's runaway lover. George dies alone. Mrs. Herrera actually has to leave her lover because of his cruel actions. Can we think of something else? What goes around will come back around. Does Hat want to live? Are we shown by Naipaul that Hat wants to live this commitment-free life? But in the end, does it backfire on him and land him in prison? Yes. Okay. Can we think of, if we're not looking at Naipaul, can we think of another story in which we see this theme coming across clearly, this life lesson? What goes around will come back around. The Gowling wife.
Not for sure.
The so-called beautiful young man is shown as looking for his perfect match. And does he is a monster. And does he get his perfect match? She's a monster too.
Mm-hmm. But he just don't know. She's
yes.
disguised.
And she was in this lovely disguise. Yes. And what about, and in the end, has he been consuming, gobbling up the self-esteem of the local girls? And does she, the perfect match for him, the Gowling wife, gobble him up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Suck the eyes out first.
Huh?
Took the eyes out first.
And why does she take his eyes out first? Yes. Because we the readers get the impression that the message for us is that in actual fact, when he had his physical vision, he lacked moral and emotional vision. So maybe when you take his eyes out, goodness, maybe he'll see better. Yes.
He can see her better.
He can see her better, thank you, just before she gobbles up the rest of him.
Yeah.
Okay, freedom is not free. Somebody told me, the boy narrator in How I Left Miguel Street actually gets a scholarship to go away. Yes? And the mother will pay for his freedom from Miguel Street. He is freed from the underdevelopment and the confusion and the poverty of Miguel Street. But who pays the bill? His mother, in terms of not just money, but loneliness, missing him. Then, of course, you told me freedom comes at a price. It could be in relation to Mrs. Herrera's gift when she returns to her husband. The gift that is the black car. Yes? But did we need to explain more? And perhaps the butler, who, if we were making a movie of this story, the butler isn't just a butler. He's a guard.
Yeah.
Yes. Then did I get some interesting ones in regard to children are human beings too. You told me, referring to Laura's oldest daughter, whom she tried to give a better life, but is impregnated by the teacher. She is in fact a human being and a female who can get pregnant, and a child who is being abused and who eventually takes her own life. Yes? Then you also told me this could also refer to Boy. He often says risque things. Risque means on the somewhat vulgar side. Often amusing, but with a tinge of vulgarity. From the French, risque. Okay. He does, yeah, in relation to what he sees. But he's only human. Boy is a child still, isn't he? He's only human, yes? When boy opens his mouth and lets all sorts of things drop out, you know, as they say in the Eastern Caribbean, mouth open, story drop out. Yes. He says, why is Laura so upset? I mean, she does do this all the time. It's absolutely true.
I don't know why she was upset, because apparently it seemed she had too much sugar. She didn't sit down and talk to her about anything.
Apparently she wasn't teaching any values.
And then the daughter only did what she seen was happening.
And the daughter, we don't know if the daughter chose this or she was just easily seduced.
Yeah.
Because this is how she saw her mother operating. Okay. Then you told me something very nice. For every action has a reaction. Did we see that life lesson coming across very clearly? This lady told me, we noticed that there are attempts, hasty attempts at revenge, cost him time in prison and cost him time away from the boy narrator. His hasty attempts at revenge against who? Dolly. Where did Dolly go after? Venezuela or Tunapuna? Somewhere. Yes? Taking the jewelries, how dare she? Yes? And Hat goes and beats her up, and apparently it's a terrible thing, and he comes back saying, I kill a woman. Yeah? But he actually didn't kill her. But it cost him. Then, of course...
He probably left her down there, and she probably wasn't moving much, but he thought that she was done good.
Yes. If we were making a movie of this book, is the scene between Dolly and Hat going to be a very, very important scene? Then, of course, you told me for every action has a reaction. The abuse inflicted on Mrs. Herrera forces her to leave Tony, who actually needs her. Then George's wife dies, frail and abused, and his daughter is forced to become a prostitute by her own father. Then there is Laura's anguish at her daughter's pregnancy and her anger. But these push her daughter to suicide. Every action has a reaction. Okay. Then, of course, we had another page now, which I think everybody got page 2. We were looking also at archetypes. Mrs. Herrera, yes? Do we all have that in front of us? Archetypes attached to characters or incidents. I have yours, Jada. I have yours. It says Mrs. Herrera, Miguel Street. Do we all have that page? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Well, I have your own, Jada.
Yeah,
I'm using it as a master copy. Thank you. Are we looking at, for Mrs. Herrera, the brown sugar, the manipulator, the victim, yes? What else? The sex goddess, yes? The abuser. The survivor. We get the impression Mrs. Herrera will survive long after she has buried her husband. Yes? Because obviously the husband is the one in that marriage who really cares. So he's going to suffer. Huh? Yes. Then the boy narrator's mother. Are we looking at the mommy, the voice of reason, as you put it, the Amazon, the survivor, and what else? The earth mother. Is the mother of the boy the earth mother to people in need like Mrs. Herrera? Mrs. Herrera keeps running to the boy's mother. Yes? The boy's mother is actually a bit amazed by Mrs. Herrera when the husband has put the note in the newspaper saying, I, Hubert Christiani, am no longer responsible for any debts incurred by my wife.
She didn't see it, but everybody else seen it.
Yes. And Mrs. Herrera says that I'm going back to my husband. Yes. And the boy's mother, you know, why don't you lend these guys this lady's own? Well, we can just do it together, yes? Is it an interesting scenario between the boy's mother and Mrs. Herrera? Mrs. Herrera says, I'm leaving Tony. The boy's mother is interested, and where are you going? I'm going back to my husband. The boy's mother can't really get it.
Really confused.
Really confused. Did you see what he wrote in the newspapers? Mrs. Herrera says, no problem. Hubert is like a boy, you know. If I go back tomorrow, he'll take me back.
That's it.
And what is it, the boy narrator, who is there listening, maybe having supper in the kitchen? What is it he says? And saying that she looked different and hard. Is he making a moral judgment as a result of his observations? Of course. Does he see the dualistic quality in Mrs. Herrera now? She's no longer the victim. She's the victimizer. She's the abuser of her husband, and a very deliberate abuser too. Okay.
Wasn't Tony her husband's friend?
Tony was her husband's friend and former patient. Couldn't she have maybe chosen a stranger?
Yeah, would have been better.
In perhaps better taste? Put a little distance between what she was doing and the husband. Okay. There we are. So the boy's mother is a kind of mother figure to Mrs. Herrera. But, you know, she's the earth mother. People come with their problems to her. But the truth is, she doesn't really understand Mrs. Herrera's type of arrogance. When Mrs. Herrera says, oh, he's like a boy and he'll take me back tomorrow, are we seeing arrogance and real hostility and unkindness? Yes or no? Callousness is the word, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Then we looked at the levels of form and content. We're looking at form, which is the structural element, the how, the level of content, theme, the what. Then, of course, the first-person narrator, subjective, potentially biased, a window on the work. The work is seen through the eyes of the first-person narrator. We all knew that. Plus 3. Major themes of Miguel Street. Okay. Is voice a structure or a theme? Did we do that last time? Yes. We're looking at gender roles, sociocultural values, sexual values or the lack thereof, the human condition, human life. Then, of course, the journey towards adulthood or the journey towards manhood. Yes, isn't that a major theme? And then our archetypes, major themes as well. The disappearing father figure, the stud, the Amazon, the survivor. Yes? The earth mother. Okay. Have we gone through everything? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So we had different pages because 2 of you, I think, came late, but I think we've covered everything. Okay. I also brought for you today some former students' work. There's an interesting one on the pursuit of happiness. And it was a draft that this student gave me. And then, of course, we have one by Alexandra Morgan, courtesy of Miss Morgan, on the feminine and masculine values that this lady talks about, Susan Taylor, the former editor of Essence magazine, in the one that is called The Feminine Principle. But can we go back then to our poems? Jada, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, will there be another of these quizzes after midterm? Of course. But is this good? Thank you very much. Is this good for the structure of the exam? Okay. Can we then go back to our poetry portfolio and have a look again?
Which one?
Are we going to start with, let's go back please to Mr. Nettleford. Young Bulls on the Loose. Will we get a quotation from Nettleford? And questions on it. We've spent some time on him, have we? Ask you a question. Is there anything that Nettleford said, whether or not you agree with his ending? You might have found a happy ending a bit unbelievable, given it's very optimistic ending, but given the very grim realities of what Nettleford said in the essay, is that really happy, optimistic ending? The Caribbean man wants to be a caring, loving husband, etc., etc., etc. Did that convince us? How many people were convinced? I mean, everything he had said before said the opposite. Yes? So whether or not we agree with his closing, was there anything that Nettleford said in that essay about the young bulls on the loose? Was there anything that stayed in our memories?
Yeah.
What? Sorry?
Here, as elsewhere, the definition of manhood turns on sexuality.
And here, as elsewhere, the definition of manhood turns on sexuality. Why is that such an interesting statement to you, Jada?
Because that's what we see today.
That's what we see today? Tell us more.
As in boys that determine sex as a means to becoming a man.
Boys who use sex, and we mean promiscuous sex too, don't we? As a means of becoming a man and a proof of manhood. Yes?
Being a peen.
Huh?
I say of him being a peen
It's being a pain to
to the young lady.
the people around them.
Yep.
The young heifers. Did Nettleford's analysis of how it was that these young men developed this false concept of masculinity, did that one stay in our minds? That he says on his, these people, on his adventures, he practices his sexual prowess with as many heifers as possible. In short, he learns to be a man. Huh? Self-entitled man. But is that also how the society defines manhood for him? Yes or no? Of course. Yes? And last time we were talking about love after love and the fact that the young heifers actually need to learn that there is another version of love other than what their society tells them about. Yes? If they're going to recover from the damage done to them by the young bulls. What do we think of that? When we put love after love together with this, does it make sense? In other words, does Walcott take the discussion a step further? The young bulls will do lots of damage to the heifer's self-esteem. They will create babies that they will not be fathers to. Yes? Do the heifers need to understand that it's time to what? Wake up feast on your life. Yes? Okay. Obviously the title is kind of ironic when he calls it Love After Love. Why? Because of course, let's face it, what the young bulls were offering was not really love. It was sex. Anybody else can tell us something that stayed in your memory? From the Nettleford essay. In other words, were there a lot of very memorable points that essay made, even though we didn't necessarily agree with the ending? Yes or no?
Yeah, but some parts of it is like when they're comparing the men and the boys. It's really like how most of the mentality in the Western Caribbean tend to behave, because they just believe that they just make the children and they just move on to somebody else. So
and
just continue.
Some of you told me that these men were reenacting the roles of the men in slavery who were simply used as sources of sperm to create more baby slaves. But of course, as Bob Marley says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. In other words, none but ourselves can free our minds. An interesting point, which we find echoing in our minds when we read Nettleford's essay. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a poem that brings all of that together? Love story. Is it an extremely ironic, succinct, brief poem? Love gave her eyes, the tough man locked them up tight. Can we find that one in our portfolio?
Which one?
It's called Love Story.
It's in the poem booklet.
It's in the poetry booklet, yeah? Love gave her eyes, the tough man smiled or something. Locked them up tight. It's in the booklet with Love After Love, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, remember this? Do we need another one? Okay. Let's face it, folks. Are there as many versions of love as there are human beings? Yes or no? Yes. Do we use that word love very loosely?
Yeah.
You say, I love chocolate ice cream. I can't get enough. Oh gosh, I love these shoes that I just saw in the boutique. Yes?
Yeah, people.
I love my mother.
But you're supposed to mean that?
I love doing computer games. Yes? I love gardening. We use the word love very loosely. Yes? And if you really, really want to get a good definition of love, go where? Back to the Bible. Corinthians 13. Yes? When they talk about charity, love does not falter. Yes? Love understandeth all, etc. Go back to Corinthians 13 in the Bible, and we get a real idea of what love is. Yes? But do these writers then engage us in a discussion about love? Yes. To stick a pin, does Naipaul give us any credible, acceptable version of real love? Or does Naipaul show us a world without love?
I was seeing all the Bapernada except for the mother and the boy.
The mother and the son. Is heart
I saw the love going there too.
it has a form of love in regard to the boy, but it's not strong enough. Sorry?
You teaching him wrong things?
Yes, it's not strong enough for our heart to clean up his act, is it? No. To really be a continuing father to that child. What about Easton Lee's poem that we discussed last time, My Father Inside. Do we see any acceptable, credible, believable version of love there? Yeah. There is the wealthy father who substitutes material things for love, yes? And then there's the poor father who understands that real love means making the sacrifice and the effort to be in that child's life, not simply in the house, but in his life. Have a lot of people found that after a divorce or a bad breakup, some parents, especially fathers, may actually, maybe it suddenly comes across to them what this should have been about. Some fathers actually spend more quality time with their children, though they are not living in the same house. They actually make an effort. In other words, when we say my father inside, it's not just simply in the house. It's inside my life. Yes? Because, of course, some fathers are there in the house and in the home, but as one student put it to me last term, in body only. Yes? He's there, but he's there in body only. Okay. So, on the topic of love then, did we get a very, very ironic version of love in that powerful short poem? It's in our booklet called Love After Love. Do we have that, everybody? I have some extras here. We have it? Mm-hmm. Okay. And that one is called Love Story. And is the title ironic? And how? Yes or no? It says page 29. Do we all have it in front of us? We have an extra copy here. It's in our booklet called Love After Love. It's about page 4 or 3. Mm-hmm. Yes or no? Love Story. It's in the booklet with Love After Love on the front. It's about page 4, please.
No, I have it. I thought you were going back to Love After Love.
No, we'll come back to it later. But let's have a look at this one as our last one for the exam. In other words, did Naipaul present us a world in which there was very little believable love? Yes or no? Yes. And does Nettleford show us how people can be encouraged by the culture around them and the values around them to mistake sex for love and mistake sex for manhood or womanhood? Yes?
Yeah. More of a reality.
Yeah. Very realistic. But here is another version, and did Lorna Goodison show us a woman, for my mother may I inherit only half of her strength. I only want half. Yes? She was too strong for her own good. Yes? Did she show us a woman who was, in a sense, a victim of her own version of love? You said something, Jada, when we were discussing that the other day. You said she was a victim of, how did you put it? I think you said something to the effect that she was a victim of her belief in the irrationality of her love. Okay, here's another one. Do we all have Mr. Morris's poem, Love Story, in front of us? Okay, now close your eyes and see what pictures you get. Now, what's interesting about this poem is it's so short. Like Love After Love, It's extremely short, very dynamically compressed and concise, yes. And yet it says a mouthful and more. Close your eyes. Love story. Love gave her eyes. The tough man snatched, locked them up tight. Love gave her a hand. The tough man tickled it early one night. Is this a little gesture that I don't know if they still have it in Jamaica, where somebody will stroke the middle of your hand like this? It's a sexual, come on. It means I want to get next to you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if they still have it in Jamaica, but it used to be so. Yes, here too.
I just thought they were feeling your hand, you know. I don't know what I mean.
Love gave her a hand. The tough man tickled it early one night. Love gave her tongue. The tough man found it tasted right. Love gave her body. The tough man smiled, switched off the light. Love gave her heart. The tough man fled, flaccid with fright. Listen to it this way now. Does it tell the story in another way if we read only the first line of each verse? Love gave her eyes. Love gave her hand. Love gave her tongue. Love gave her body. And love gave her heart. Does that tell it the story of the love from the woman's perspective? Yes? But let's hear it from the man's perspective, the stud's perspective.
Also in like chronological order of how, like a woman falls in love.
How a woman falls in
like
love.
You meet with your eyes first, and then you end up giving your hand.
Yes.
And, you kiss, and then you end up speaking with them, and then you...
And then you fall in. In other words, for the woman here, is this about, as you put it, the progression of love and the growth of love? But for the man, this is just what? Great sex. And who is next?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's look at the last stanza, the last verse of each stanza. And we'll come back to you then, Derrimore, when you said it's the chronological development of this version of love. Locked them up tight. Early one night, it tasted right. Switched off the light. Flaccid with fright. Now, as we said...
Connected now.
Yeah, but what you've got to run. Flaccid is a word that tends to be used a lot in a sexual sense, as in sexual impotence.
You know, every time you say it, like I have a actual image of him running. Like,
of a man actually getting up and running.
like right.
Yeah.
After.
In other words, if emotions are involved here, let's go.
While you're here.
Yes, because of course the heart represents the emotions. Yes. And what about the middle? No. What's the expression the Americans use? Man up.
Yeah.
This guy can't man up to things, can he?
No.
Let's look at the middle verse, middle lines in each verse. The tough man snatched. The tough man tickled it. The tough man found. The tough man smiled. The tough man fled. Is the story told over and over in such a way that it looks like a poem within a poem? Yes or no? Of course. Yes. Okay. What are the major tones here? Totally ironic. Remember from English 101, when we're looking at irony, we're looking at what? Contradictions of some kind, the awareness of contradictions. Does this poet deliberately, are we looking at a third person narrator, not one who says I, the all-seeing, omniscient, comprehensive observer, yes? Who is emotionally distanced, but very objective as a result. Yes or no? Is that what we get from a third person voice? But is it an observer who is completely ironic? Yes or no? Is he pointing out the contradictions between the woman's version of love and the man's behavior? Is this the heifer versus the bull? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Remember, we're told that we had the mothers, the West Indian mothers, have this dualistic child-rearing method. They bring up the girls in one way, with one set of values, and they bring up the boys in another way, with, opposed sets of values. Mm-hmm. Is this the recipe for heartbreak?
Yeah.
Is this for the girls? Is this also the recipe for total confusion in the society?
Yeah.
You bet it is. Now, what does Morris do? Does he use the power of irony to, in actual fact, make a clear criticism of the results of these dualistic, opposed value systems in a way that, in a sense, for us, continues the conversation about what's really happening between men and women in the Caribbean? Professor Miller may have said, oh, it's the lack of father figures. Nettleford says it's the dualistic child-rearing methods of these mamas. Maybe it's both. It's not either or, it's both and. And then does Morris now continue the discussion in a very detailed and ironic way that absolutely nails down the issues of opposed sexual values, opposed sexual morals between the men and the women.
It's a pretty short form to analyze.
Yes.
Male and female.
But are the tones ironic and very what? Observant and informative?
The title itself.
The title itself is totally ironic, isn't it? Yes. Is this the heifer versus the bull? Of course. And is this girl in love story the younger version of the mother in For My Mother May I Inherit Half Her Strength? Only in that case the man didn't disappear. He stuck around, got married, but he never was truly married in spirit, was he? Yes? And will the girl who has been abandoned by the tough man, is the tough man the stud? Will the girl who has been abandoned by this man need to remember there is such a thing as love after love, as Walcott tells it? Feast on your life. Give wine, give bread. Do wine and bread represent spiritual renewal in the church? Yes, of course. Okay. Do we see where these writers then are, in a sense, giving us a continuing conversation about love versus sex? Sex as a weapon, sex as a game. Yes? Versus love, the real thing, as a commitment. And sex as a commitment. It's not a game. Okay. And then, of course, Easton Lee, when he gives us the two versions of fatherhood, shows us fatherhood as commitment, real love, be inside your child's life. It doesn't take a lot of money, but it takes a lot of love. It takes a lot of commitment. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions then? Could we, any questions, my friends? Wow, the time has gone fast. what is the Americans say? Time flies when you're having fun. Okay. One more question then. If we're looking at the things that we want to look over for Tuesday's exam, we're looking at these poems about love, love after love, love story, my father inside, yes? For my mother, may I inherit half her strength. But you wouldn't get a detailed one on that because we haven't gone through it line by line, have we? We've just profiled the mother and the father, the so-called father. Then could we get a quotation from the Nettleford essay? Yes? And do we have problems isolating the tones? Remember, the tones are the emotional attitudes. Yes? And for every emotion, there is a matching tone. Okay. Then, of course, Love After Love by Walcott. In other words, this whole conversation about what love is and what love is not. Yes? Then, could we also get something from our beloved Miguel Street? A quotation, and then you have to comment on it. Fair enough? In other words, circle the things or, make notes, what tones are used, the usual. Was it helpful?
Yes.
Do we know exactly where we're heading now? Okay, because we need to get this midterm exam out of our lives so that we can move on to the Bodden collection. Yes or no?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So have a good weekend. And the last 3 lectures are on the blog, and I'll ask Mr. Roberto to put this on the blog this weekend too, so that our friend can access it.
Okay.
So when you talk to her, will you tell her, go
Yes,
back?
ma'am. No problem.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Mhm.
RSSGCT.
Yes. So we press here. Before we press done, we press